October 12, 1943. 23,000 feet above the Rhineland, a B-17 flying fortress, tail number 42367, lurched as if the sky itself had grabbed it by the wing. A 20mm shell tore through engine number 3. Black smoke rolled out of the cowling like a funeral banner. In the cockpit, First Lieutenant Robert Hayes felt the control yoke judder in his hands, felt the nose dip 15 degrees, felt the bomber's entire weight begin to argue with gravity. Behind him, in the radio room, Sergeant Mike Donnelly saw hydraulic fluid spray across the fuselage wall in a shining arc. Not blood. But it looked close enough in the dim red light that your brain made the comparison anyway. And in a P-47 Thunderbolt above and to the right, another pilot watched it happen. First Lieutenant James Howell. Call sign, Jersey 27, 24 years old, New Jersey farm boy. A man who knew, because everyone knew, what happened to stragglers. The bomber formation kept going, standard procedure. One damaged aircraft couldn't compromise the entire group. Hayes didn't blame them. He understood the logic. He understood the cold arithmetic of daylight bombing over Germany. But Howell did something that wasn't procedure, wasn't doctrine, wasn't smart. He broke formation and stayed. His fuel gauge read 58 minutes. The crippled bomber needed 90 to reach England. The math didn't work. Howell stayed anyway. This is the story, told the way airmen told it later, of the longest escort that should never have happened. A running battle across occupied territory. A fuel gauge sinking to nothing. A decision to ditch beside strangers rather than leave them to die alone. 9 lives saved. One pilot who treated impossible math like it was merely rude. And if you're new here, this is exactly what WWII Hidden Chapters is about. Those moments that don't fit cleanly into grand strategy maps. The margins, the stragglers, the damaged aircraft, the decisions that happen when every regulation says one thing and a human being does another. 6 hours earlier, the day had started like every other. Darkness. Coffee that tasted like metal. Boots on concrete. The briefing hut at Thorpe Abbott's, home of the 100th Bomb Group, was warm from too many bodies and too little air. A curtain covered the map. Men joked because the alternative was thinking. Someone rolled a cigarette with hands that didn't shake until he noticed they were shaking. Hayes sat with his crew. 9 other men who trusted him the way airmen trust a pilot. Not with faith, but with habit. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the bravest in stories. He was the kind of officer who checked lists twice, who kept his voice calm because calm was contagious. The curtain pulled back. A red line snaked across Europe like a cut. Target. Schweinfurt. Ball bearings. The thing inside German industry that made everything else move. Intelligence promised moderate resistance, fighter cover to the limit of escort range. Flak, heavy but manageable. A few men laughed at that part. Not because it was funny, because laughter was a way to spit in the eye of a sentence you didn't trust. Hayes looked at the map and did the quiet arithmetic every bomber pilot did. Distance, exposure, odds. He didn't see a story. He saw a day he might not survive. Across the field, Howell sat in another briefing, in another hut, with fighter pilots who lived in a different kind of math. They were told the bomber stream was their responsibility until the edge of their range. Then the bombers were on their own. Howell had heard it so many times it could have been printed inside his eyelids. Stay with the big friends until the fence, then turn back. The fence, fighter pilot slang for the English Channel. Cross it and you're home. Stay past it and you're spending fuel you don't get back. In 1943, escort doctrine wasn't built for heroism. It was built for range limits, drop tanks, and the brutal truth that a Thunderbolt could only go so far before it had to turn around. No matter what was happening behind it. They took off at first light. The fort climbed heavy, slow, stubborn, like lifting a building into the air. It joined the formation, box after box after box. Hundreds of aircraft, silver in the sun, a moving city. Over the channel, the radio was disciplined. Short calls. Nothing wasted. Then the first flak. Black bursts like dirty flowers, blooming at altitude. It wasn't random. It was aimed. It walked toward you. You watched it adjust, watched it learn where you'd be, and the insane part was that you could feel the gunners on the ground, men you couldn't see, reaching up for you with mathematics and hate. A burst rocked the B-17. Shrapnel punched through aluminum skin like it was paper. Somewhere in the fuselage, a man shouted. A gunner swore. The intercom crackled with a calm lie. Minor damage. Then came fighters. Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. Fast, sharp, built for killing. They came in packs, making the sky a slaughterhouse of intersecting tracers. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Paul Richter, fired at the lead attacker. His twin 50s stitched a bright line through space. The first WWII hit that line and came apart in a violent mid-air disassembly, metal and fire scattering like a magician's trick gone wrong. But the other fighters kept coming. Because one plane dying didn't discourage them, it encouraged them. That's when No. 3 engine took the 20mm hit. The fortress shuddered. Smoke poured out. Oil pressure dropped. Hayes felt the bomber begin to lose the argument with altitude. "Feather 3, his co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, said, voice tight. Hayes nodded and pulled the controls. The propeller blades turned edge-on to the wind. The engine became dead weight, and inside that cockpit, the sensations were brutal and intimate. The smell of cordite and hot oil, the rubber bite of an oxygen mask, frost tracing the edges of the glass, your own voice sounding chudge and distant through the mic. The way vibration changes when an engine dies, like the aircraft's heartbeat stuttering. The way the airplane talks through the yoke, warning you in tremors that you're now flying something wounded. They were still deep in enemy airspace, and the escorts were nearing their turn-back point. At the German border, the P-47's fuel situation became the only truth that mattered. They had fought hard, they had burned time, burned ammunition, burned lives. Now they had to burn back toward home. Howell watched the escort leader waggle wings, the signal to turn. He saw fighters peel away, one by one, like leaves in wind. And he saw the crippled B-17 falling behind. Not dramatically, not like in movies, just slowly. A little less speed, a little less altitude, a little more smoke, a little more loneliness. Howell's hand moved to his radio switch almost without permission. "Big friend, this is Jersey 27. I'm on your right. I have you visual." Hayes answered. Controlled, professional. "Jersey, we're losing hydraulics. 3 is out. We've got smoke. We can't hold altitude." Howell looked at his fuel gauge. 58 minutes, maybe less. He looked at the bomber's position on the world. 140 miles from England. Occupied territory below. He heard his flight leader's call. "Jersey 27, rejoin. We're turning." Howell didn't answer immediately. He stared at that B-17 like it was an argument he refused to lose. Then he spoke to Hayes again. "Copy your condition, big friend. I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise he had no authorization to make, but he made it anyway. Howell wasn't a legend in his own mind. He was a farm kid who'd learned early that you finish what you start. He'd signed up with a quiet, stubborn motive. Do your duty, protect your own, come back if you can. In training, a mentor had drilled the one line that stuck. Never leave your wingman. And somewhere between the first mission and the 72nd, Howell had started to see bombers as slow brothers, big, vulnerable, brave in a way fighters didn't have to be. They couldn't run. They couldn't dodge. They took it on the chin and kept flying. Movement at 2 o'clock. Howell's head snapped right. 3 BF-109s, splinter camouflage, sliding in from the sun angle. They had spotted the wounded bomber the way wolves spot an injured deer. They weren't here to duel. They were here to finish. Howell advanced throttle. The P-47's radial engine roared, a deep animal sound with 2,000 horses inside it. The Thunderbolt surged forward. The lead Messerschmitt saw him and broke left. Too late. Howell pressed the trigger. 8 .50-caliber guns fired at once, and for a brief moment the airplane felt like it was shooting itself backward through the sky. Shell casings streamed out. Tracer fire converged. Hits. Solid hits. The German canopy shattered. The fighter rolled inverted and fell away trailing smoke. The other two broke, climbed, reconsidered. They had expected a free kill. Instead, they found a pilot who treated them like an inconvenience. Inside the B-17, the crew heard Howell's guns and understood something vital. They weren't alone. Hayes keyed the mic. "Jersey, you're burning fuel," Howell answered, almost casual. "You're burning altitude. We all got problems. And here's the thing most people don't realize. A fighter carries a terrifying amount of firepower, but only for a terrifyingly short time. Those 8 guns, thousands of rounds. On paper, it sounds endless. In practice, it's seconds. Bursts matter. Discipline matters. And sometimes you don't fire to kill. You fire to disrupt, to break a formation, to force a flinch, to make the enemy's perfect geometry turn sloppy. The bomber continued descending. 20,000 feet. 19. 18. It passed through cloud, and for half a minute the world became white. Blind flight? Except now there was no formation. Just one bomber and one fighter, connected by radio and stubbornness. When they broke out beneath the cloud, Howell saw the next wave. 5 fighters, Vic formation, coming head-on at 12 o'clock. 5. Howell positioned himself directly between them and the bomber, making himself the first problem they had to solve. A combined closing speed over 500 knots. Not a dogfight yet. A collision course with decisions. At 3,000 yards, Howell opened fire. Too far for clean kills, but close enough to draw lines in the air that told the enemy, "You are not unopposed." The lead fighter twitched away, then another. Formation cracked. The attack lost its teeth. Howell dove under them, rolled, came up firing at the trailing aircraft. The Messerschmitt shuddered and leaked smoke. 2 fighters tried to slip around toward the bomber's tail. In the B-17, tail gunner Sergeant Walt Kendrick fired. Then his guns jammed after 4 rounds. A jam in the air is a betrayal. You do everything right and metal refuses to cooperate. Kendrick swore, hands frantic. Howell saw the opening in the bomber's defense like a flashing sign. He hauled the P-47 into a brutal, high-G turn. Vision grayed at the edges. The Thunderbolt wasn't built for ballet, but Howell made it dance. He fired at 600 yards. The German pilot never saw it coming. The wing folded, tore away. The fighter tumbled end over end into cloud. The remaining attackers broke off. Silence followed. Relative silence, the kind where you can still hear engines and wind and your own breathing loud in your mask. Hayes exhaled once. Deep. "Jersey, you just saved our lives." Howell didn't answer right away. He was looking at his fuel gauge again. 28 minutes. The channel was still 65 miles away. Now the story becomes a montage of math. 2 men doing 2 different calculations, both of them knowing the numbers don't care about bravery. Hayes watches altitude bleed away and compares it to distance. He thinks in feet per minute and miles per hour, and what a B-17 becomes when it's damaged. A flying brick with a crew inside. Howell watches fuel fall and compares it to time. He thinks in minutes per mile, throttle settings, mixture levers, and the cruel joke that the safer he flies, the less protection he can give. Inside the fortress, survival became a series of small tasks. Donnelly in the radio room fought the hydraulics like they were a living enemy. Every pump, every lever, every crank was done with the knowledge that if they ditched, the plane would become a sinking metal cave. The wounded ball turret gunner, Sergeant Eddie Martinez, tried to ignore the pain in his shoulder, while also thinking about the one nightmare every ball turret gunner carried. Water landing. Briggs in the waist position checked his ammo, then checked it again, like counting bullets could control fate. Up front, Morrison kept his voice calm and his hands moving. Restart attempts, trim changes, Fire bottle checks. "Skipper," he said, steady but urgent, "we should consider bailout." Hayes stared out at the horizon and didn't answer immediately. Because bailout meant enemy territory. Captivity if you lived. And Martinez might not even get out clean. "Not yet," Hayes said finally. "Not while we still got a chance." Above them, Howell flew protective S-turns. He wasn't just escorting. He was scanning, eyes constantly moving, hunting for movement that didn't belong. Because the longer this went on, the more likely it became that every Luftwaffe pilot in northern France heard the same message. Crippled bomber, easy kill, coordinates. And they were coming. Somewhere on the ground, a controller would be doing his own cold work. Vectoring fighters, prioritizing targets, treating stragglers like the simplest equation of the day. Free hunts, clean kills, minimal risk. They appeared at 10 o'clock high. 6 Bf-109s in a clean, disciplined dive from 17,000 feet. Not probing attacks now, a coordinated kill. Howell felt his jaw tighten. 6 against 1. And he had maybe 20 seconds of firing time left. He pushed throttle forward. Fuel economy be damned. He climbed to meet them because if he waited, the bomber would take the first impact. At 1,200 yards, Howell fired early again, tracers arcing upward, a warning written in hot lead. The lead German broke formation to avoid the stream. The perfect geometry collapsed into chaos. 2 veered left, 2 right, 2 continued straight. Howell picked one, closed to 400 yards, and fired a tight burst. The Messerschmitt's tail section disintegrated, and the aircraft pitched up, stalled, spun down like a dropped knife. But now the others were attacking from multiple angles. 2 dove on the bomber from 7 o'clock high. Cannon fire sparkled. Kendrick's guns finally cleared. He fired, bullets ripping into one attacker's engine. The German pulled away, trailing smoke. The second pressed the attack anyway. Cannon shells walked across the bomber's left wing. One struck near the number 2 tank. The tank was almost empty, but fumes are flammable, and October air carried fire like gossip. Flames blossomed out of the wing. "Fire in 2, Morrison shouted. He pulled the suppression handle. CO2 flooded. The flames sputtered and died, but the engine was finished. The prop seized. Dead weight. Now they were on 2 engines. 2 out of 4. Hayes fought the controls as the bomber wanted to roll left into its own damage. The fortress became a wounded animal, trying not to fall over. Morrison leaned closer. "Skipper, we've got to bail." Hayes shook his head. "Not yet. Jersey's still with us." And he was. Howell met the remaining fighters in a savage, close-in fight. A 20mm shell struck his aircraft, but failed to penetrate the armor behind the cockpit. Another tore through the wing, missing a fuel tank by inches. He fired a deflection shot that felt impossible, and watched a Bf-109 explode into a brief orange fireball. The remaining German fighters finally broke off. They had lost too much for one bomber. Howell rejoined the fort. Fuel gauge, 11 minutes. The channel, 42 miles. They were 7 minutes short. And now the moral dilemma finally arrives in words, not numbers. Hayes understood what Howell was doing, understood it with a pilot's clarity. If Howell stayed, he would die or be captured. If Howell left, the bomber would almost certainly die. Howell understood it too. It's one thing to be brave when the odds are bad. It's another thing to be brave when the math is settled. 7,000 feet. The French coast appeared ahead like a knife edge. Beyond it, cold gray water. Beyond that, England, so close it felt like mockery. Howell's gauge touched the red. 8 minutes, maybe less, and gauges lie at the end. Anti-aircraft batteries opened up from the coast. Flak bursts, smaller now, more precise. Hayes jinked what little he could. A shell detonated close enough to rock the bomber. Shrapnel peppered the fuselage. Briggs felt warmth on his leg. Blood. A fragment in the thigh. Pain, but not fatal. Not yet. 6,000 feet. They crossed the coastline out over the channel. The water below looked like metal, Howell checked fuel again. 5 minutes. The English coast was still 28 miles away. He would go dry 12 miles short. He made his decision. "Big friend," Howell said over the radio, voice steady in a way that felt unreal. "I'm going to the deck. When you ditch, I'll ditch close. Better chance for rescue." Hayes understood instantly. Instead of turning back to French territory, where Howell might crash land and become a prisoner, Howell was choosing the water, choosing the one place that didn't belong to either side, choosing to be with them at the end. "Jersey, negative," Hayes said. "You can still make France. You'll live. You'll be a POW. That's living." Howell's reply came quiet. "Not leaving you, big friend. We go home together, or not at all." Inside the bomber, the crew heard it on the intercom. 10 men who had accepted death suddenly felt something else. Hope. Not because the math changed, because a human decision changed what the math meant. Hayes began ditching prep like a ritual, because rituals are what you do when you can't control the outcome. Harnesses tight, loose gear secured, rafts ready, hatches identified. Men told exactly where to move and when, because confusion kills faster than water. Martinez tried again to climb out of the ball turret. Shoulder screaming. The opening too tight, the angle wrong. Pain making time feel slippery. Howell's engine coughed, the first stutter of fuel starvation. He switched tanks, squeezed seconds out of lines and vapor. Morrison read ditching items with a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Crew, prepare for water landing." In the tail, Kendrick strapped in. In the radio room, Donnelly braced. In the waist, men wedged themselves between racks like it would matter. Martinez fought to climb out of the ball turret, got halfway, then stopped, trapped by pain and geometry. 1,000 feet. Howell's engine coughed again, longer. 800, 700, 600. Howell's engine quit. The silence was shocking. One moment the world was engine roar, the next it was wind and your own breath. The P-47 became a glider, an 8-ton glider with bad manners. Howell pushed the nose down to keep airspeed. Too slow and he'd stall and cartwheel. Too fast an impact would tear wings off. Hayes lined up into the wind. 400 feet. 300. 2. The B-17 hit the water. It wasn't a landing. It was a collision with the ocean. The fuselage flexed like something alive. Rivets popped. Seams split. Water erupted upward in huge plumes. The bomber skipped once, twice, then settled into the sea in a fountain of spray. Inside, men slammed forward against restraints. Equipment tore loose. The nose section buckled. The world became noise and impact and the taste of fear behind oxygen masks. The aircraft slid, slowed, stopped, then began to sink. "Everybody out," Hayes shouted. "Out now." They scrambled for exits. Top hatch, waist windows, nose hatch. Morrison kicked the cockpit hatch open. Cold air hit them like a slap. They crawled onto the wing. The bomber tilted left as water rushed in. It had minutes, maybe less. 200 yards away, Howell hit the water nose first. The engine drove downward like an anchor. The aircraft flipped forward. Howell's head struck the gun sight. Blood ran into his eyes. Water flooded the cockpit. So cold it felt like being punched. He fumbled the canopy release with hands that were already numb. The canopy separated. Water surged. Howell pushed out, fighting his own gear, the weight of boots and parachute and instinct screaming that humans do not belong here. He broke free as the P-47 vanished beneath the surface. He surfaced gasping and saw the bomber, men in the water, orange rafts, shapes fighting the sea. Howell inflated his Mae West and began swimming. Every stroke was agony. Cold water does something to time. It doesn't just sap strength. It steals thought. It turns simple choices into slow puzzles. It makes fingers stop being fingers. It makes language disappear. Men try to talk to stay awake. Someone prays. Someone cracks a joke that isn't funny, but everyone needs it anyway because laughter means you're still alive enough to try. And if you're still here listening, you already understand why these stories matter. Not because war is glorious, because choices are. Decisions made in seconds can echo for decades. So if you want more WWII Hidden Chapters, more missions, more impossible math, more moments where one human decision bends history, subscribe. And if you know someone who loves WWII aviation stories, share this video with them. These men are gone. Their courage isn't. The only way it survives is if we keep telling it. Howell reached the nearest raft and hands pulled him aboard. Hayes's face appeared above him, white with cold, eyes alive. "Jersey," Hayes said, voice cracked. "You crazy bastard, you actually did it." Howell tried to answer but couldn't. His teeth chattered so hard it felt like they might break. They counted heads, 8 men in the first raft, 3 in the second, 11 total, 10 bomber crew and 1 fighter pilot. Everyone who mattered was there. Then Hayes looked again. "Where's Martinez?" Silence. Donnelly's voice came quietly, like someone speaking in church. "He didn't make it out, Skipper. The ball turret." Hayes closed his eyes. 9 saved. 1 lost. That was the war's arithmetic. They floated in the channel, bobbing in gray water that didn't care about medals or names. Minutes felt like hours. Men recited prayers. Some cried. Some stared at the sky with the blank look of people who have used up their emotions and are borrowing calm from shock. Then a sound, not imagination. A real engine, distant at first, then louder. An RAF rescue launch cut through the water, throwing spray. Men on the boat shouted. Hands reached out. They were hauled aboard one by one. Hayes made sure Howell went first. "This man," Hayes told the British sailors through chattering teeth, "stayed with us for 90 miles, fought off a pack, ran out of fuel, and ditched beside us. He saved 9 lives today." The British coxswain looked at Howell, soaking, bleeding, shaking, and nodded once. "Well done, Yank," he said. "Well done indeed." Afterward, the world shrank to a debrief room and the smell of hot tea and blankets and the quiet violence of shaking hands that wouldn't stop. Medics cut away wet clothes. Someone wrapped Howell in wool like he was a child. Howell tried to downplay it, tried to turn it into something small, because men who do impossible things often refuse to believe they did them. Hayes didn't let him, because Hayes knew something Howell didn't want to say out loud. That the line between 9 families grieving and 9 families sending Christmas cards was one decision made in the air. 3 days later, a medal was discussed. Paperwork moved. Words like extraordinary heroism got typed on forms that could never carry the weight of cold water or tracer fire. Hayes and the crew attended the ceremony because they insisted on it. Howell stood stiff at attention while the Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to his chest. Cameras clicked. Officers shook hands. Someone made a speech that sounded too clean for what happened. Later, years later, Hayes was asked what he remembered. He said, "We were dead. We knew it. Everyone knew it." Then he paused. And then a pilot in a P-47 decided we weren't dying that day. Howell went home after the war. He didn't talk much about combat. When people asked about the medal, he changed the subject. But the men of that bomber crew never forgot. They sent Christmas cards. They sent baby photos. They sent wedding invitations. 9 families, living because a man who had no reason to care decided to care anyway. 90 miles, 20 enemy fighters engaged, depending on who you ask, depending on how the story gets told. 1 fuel gauge that hit empty, 1 decision that turned procedure into rebellion. And 1 lesson the airmen carried for the rest of their lives. Sometimes the math doesn't change. You do.